Hey everyone, it's time to kick it in gear. My name is Kevin Griffin. I'm the owner of SwiftKick. We're a software training and consulting company based out of Southeast Virginia. And today I am joined by Aisha Blake. How are you today?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Now, we've been chatting for like the past half an hour about just the comedy of errors that today has been. And so I'll start with me and then I'll let you take over your problems. I am traveling to Cleveland, Ohio today. I'm in a hotel and I check in and I want to connect to Wi-Fi. So I figured no one's in the hotel. I should have pretty good Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi doesn't work. So I'm emailing back and forth. Like, all right, well, I'm going to tether my phone. So I'm on my phone right now. So if I'm choppy, a little pixelated, or sounds cutting out, it's because the phone's over there trying to do the hard work. But Aisha, what's that behind you?
Yeah. You may have noticed there is a banister here. I am currently sitting in the stairwell of my office building. I um, I thought that I had this room booked in our office that would have been so perfect for recording a webinar. And I don't know, I probably just like never hit the submit button, but I
Yeah.
realized that today that I would need to find a place to record. And so if you hear some like minor booming sounds in the background, it's probably someone walking between floors, not to worry.
Unless a fire alarm goes off or something, we have nothing to fear, right? Just a little bit of background
Absolutely.
noise.
Yeah,
So,
we should be fine.
so we have a couple folks in the chat. Hopefully, we have a couple more people joining us as we get started. But I see Solomon out there says hi. But if you're in the chat right now, tell us where you're chatting from, and we're going to start this conversation. With a little bit of Q&A, I want to learn more about you, and I think our viewers do as well. Now, you and I met because you came down to Revolution Conf this past year, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a ton of fun.
Well, I'm glad. You know what? We're doing it again next year.
Oh,
We
how
already
about
have
that?
our date. We're coming back on June 6th and 7th. Same venue as before. I mean, if you have time in your schedule, we would love for you to come down and join us.
Oh, that is actually not great for me. So I just so happened to organize a conference here in Detroit called Self Conference, and
Well,
we will be that same weekend.
so is it the weekend or the week? Because we're Thursday, Friday. We
We're
could.
Friday, Saturday.
All right. So you come up on Thursday and you do half of Friday. Then we'll go to your conference the other half of Friday
Just split it
and Saturday. Yeah,
50-50.
we can make this work. I know it. Well, awesome. So if you're out there, I'm going to put information about our conferences in there as well. I already know about Self Conference, so I'll put link to Self Conference in there as well. So if you rather go to Detroit than Virginia Beach, or Virginia Beach instead of Detroit, I mean, choose. They're both great cities. So
This is true.
you don't. It's so hard to choose sometimes, and it's the middle of summer, so it's not like you have the blistering cold snow of Detroit.
That's true. If we were doing this right now, I would say go to Virginia.
I don't know about that. It's not all that much warmer on the ocean front in the middle of winter. But you and I met, and I remember going out to several people in Revolution Com and asking them to come on the show, and you were very gracious and agreed to come on. So thank you
Yeah, of
for
course.
that. But folks out there who might not have had the opportunity to meet you in person or hear you speak, let's learn a little bit more about you. So tell us, who do you work for and what do you do? Let's start there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am primarily a JavaScript developer, web developer in general. I work for a really awesome company called Detroit Labs. which you'd be surprised how many times I've been asked, oh, where is that? We are, in fact, in Detroit. I do highly recommend visiting, even if it's not for a self-conference. But yeah, we do mostly mobile apps and obviously some web projects. A little bit of everything, honestly. We've done some really cool, like, interesting experimental things that I can't talk about that are
Come on. It's
really
not like this
awesome.
is live on the internet or anything or recorded for all eternity. You could tell us.
Yeah.
It's safe. Safe spot. Safe
Just keep it
place.
a secret. But yeah, it's a really awesome place to work. A lot of really brilliant people who are really generous with their knowledge. And so I'm just super happy here. I've been here about a year and a half.
Well, it's awesome. Let's build on that some more. So you've been at Detroit Labs for a year and a half, but let's go back farther. Let's go back to the very beginning of your career and tell us your origin story. How'd you get mixed up? How'd you become a JavaScript developer? How'd that all get started?
Yeah. So I was really lucky. My mom is actually I've worked at IBM for 30 years. And yeah, she started she
You have a
started in the
songbook?
70s. Hmm?
Did she have a songbook? That's why I always heard IBM from the old days have songbooks and they had to know the company songs.
I have never heard that. That might have been like a pre-Aisha thing. I don't know.
All right, I'm sorry. Keep going.
Yeah. She started as like a systems engineer in like the 70s, which is for me so cool. She's like this super young Black woman with a giant afro and like with a red streak in it. And she's like going into this like obviously really corporate technical environment. And that so it just always kind of felt like a matter of course. Like, of course, this is available to you, which is not a thing that a lot of Black girls get. So that was really cool, and I didn't really come to appreciate that until I was a developer. I actually started teaching myself web development as a kid through Neopets, which I've since found out is like a thing, which is so cool. You are able to, it's sort of like if you think back to like the MySpace era where you could adapt the like theme of your page within certain parameters. It was that sort of thing. And so that was how I learned HTML, CSS. And then I came to Detroit as a Jesuit volunteer. And because I have an information science degree, my boss at the time was just sort of like, oh, you can teach the children computers. You know what you're doing. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. So I reached out to some communities locally to kind of help me learn like practical web development skills, but also how to teach. And that was what really got my career going. My first job after that year of service was at a coding boot camp called Grand Circus.
Awesome. I don't think I've ever heard that one before, but
yeah.
Fascinating. So we talk so much about tech. I mean, for the past half an hour, you and I have talked about just tech careers and stuff like that. But do you have any hobbies outside of tech that might be interesting?
I do, in fact. Probably there are too many to sustain, really. I really love powerlifting. But I don't know if that's a hobby, really. It's just like that's my favorite form of exercise. I really enjoy it. And I just recently, so I've been making jewelry for a while, and I just started selling it, which is like this new adventure. It's pretty fun. I've got a couple of my pieces on right now.
So do you have a store or anything? I
I
can.
do. I have a little Shopify store. It's like 70% finished.
So
But it's called Zuri. It's zurijewelry.co.
cool. Well, we'll have to put a link to that out there, and we might be a little late for Christmas, but
Yeah,
maybe next year. There's always
it's
birthdays,
all good.
anniversaries, stuff like that. There's always place
Yeah.
for jewelry. Yeah, I think it's fascinating that you do powerlifting. I haven't done it recently, but when I was younger, I was a power lifter
Oh,
and
sweet.
enjoyed it tremendously. It's one of the most gratifying things I've ever done in my life. Is just being able to heave a massive amount of weight above me and control it. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that last part's important
I haven't done, and not hurting yourself. That's the other important part.
for sure.
And yeah, fascinating. We could probably talk about that for a half an hour, but we're not going to. We're going to talk about taking a talk from an idea to something that's not an idea, so something that's real. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and folks in the chat, if you have any questions throughout the session, put them in the chat, and we'll have a discussion afterwards. And it's all you. Go ahead.
Sweet. Before we get started, the one downside to recording in the stairwell, the one, the big one, is that I'm not plugged in, and so my battery's dropping pretty quickly. So FYI.
Talk
Um,
fast.
yeah, I'll be quick. Hopefully, the presentation part of this will be pretty brief, and then we'll be able to kind of have a conversation. I know you have a lot of experience as a speaker and an organizer, and I'd love to get some input and questions from people who are in the chat.
Cool. All right.
All
Well,
right,
let's get going so we don't waste your battery.
let's hit it. Oh, let's get my entire screen. All right, how's that?
You're up and running.
Sweet. So the thing that I didn't mention before is that I am also the co-founder of an organization called Detroit Speakers in Tech. We're a small meetup group which is focused on training and supporting diverse speakers in the Detroit area, at least for right now. We're hoping to expand that a little bit. And so this presentation is an adapted form of something that we worked on in one of our workshops. So going from an idea to a submission, there are a ton of reasons that people are interested in speaking. And I would love, once we're kind of finished with this section, to talk to people in the chat about what really interests them about speaking, what barriers they maybe feel like they have, and kind of go from there. But one thing that I hear a lot is, one, that I don't have anything new to say. Two, no one wants to hear what I have to say. Like I'm too new, I'm too fresh, or I don't know enough about this thing. And three, the biggest thing is that I just have no idea what I would speak about. And so one exercise that we go through in our group is a brainstorming session. This is Brutuss. He has some questions to ask you about what you have to bring to the either meetup that you're looking to speak to, or even the stage at a big conference. So these are some of the questions that we kind of walk through as we are figuring out what people might want to talk about. We're trying to pick and pull and get at some things that maybe aren't super obvious. You see a lot of talks that are sort of that are how to X or an intro to Y, and don't really get at the unique perspective that you can bring to one of these presentations. So that's kind of the goal of some of these questions. So what's something that you learned recently that you're excited about? So that might be, that kind of gets at that, oh, I don't know so much about this thing. But one thing that you can do to really kind of dig into a topic is to use that thing actively. So, for example, I've definitely submitted proposals for things that I'm like, I don't know if I'm the foremost authority on this topic, but I'm super interested in it. It's brand new to me. And so I can have this perspective. I can bring this perspective of somebody who's just learning it for the first time. I can talk about some of the pitfalls that I ran into when I was working on this. I can talk about some of the gaps that I experienced when I was looking through docs, when I was trying to, get involved in the community around this platform or framework or whatever it is. And that is not only going to provide a unique perspective, but it's also giving you the opportunity to really bring story into your presentation. And that's going to be a huge plus for engagement of your audience. The second question here, what hard problem did you and or your team solve? So you have a lot of things that you could dig into here as well. What was difficult? Was there something that was unique to your use case? Chances are you're going to have whatever you come up against. You're going to have somebody in your audience that has maybe not experienced the exact same thing, but has experienced something similar. And so they're going to be able to either take something away from what you're presenting or be able to identify with the problem and therefore with you. So taking sort of inspiration from some things that were maybe a little more difficult or that you learned a lot from can be really powerful. And the second part of this is your team. How did you go about solving this as a team? And a lot of topics can be sort of tweaked to really focus more on that aspect. So maybe you want to talk about how to transfer from X database system to Y database system. How does that work? And you can talk about the mechanics of that, but a lot of that is going to be available in documentation. A lot of that is very straightforward. And while it might be useful to somebody who doesn't know where to start, a big part of that is unlikely to be all documented in one place, is how that change affected your team and how your process that you had developed made that easier or more difficult, as the case may be. Another is how can you relate something that you're passionate about to your work? So this is, again, coming back to that unique perspective. How can something that you love be related back to this concept that you want to explain or convince your audience about? I've seen a lot of really cool examples of this. And actually, I don't know if Jenna was your last speaker, Kevin, but a previous speaker on SwiftCake has a talk that pulls her love of wrestling into her work as her work testing software. And I love that. I love that because it brings your personality, your story into the work. And it makes it not only informative, but it's fun. And that's a huge part of this that I think a lot of people don't either think about or don't take seriously enough. It's that in addition to giving people information, you're also trying to entertain them. The presentations that I've taken the most away from they engaged me, they entertained me. I had a good time while I was learning. So I think that's really important to remember. I want to take a step back and talk about what to expect when you are applying to these different events. So this is specifically talking about getting into a conference. So like if one of your goals is conference speaking, and to a certain extent, speaking at meetups as well. So what is a CFP? When we talk about CFP, I feel like we throw that abbreviation around a lot, but call for proposals, and some people will use presenters or papers. The CFP is usually some kind of form that is going to collect all of your application information. So that CFP is going to hopefully outline what the organizers of the event want to see. It's going to talk about why you might want to speak at the event, and hopefully that will include some form of compensation or reimbursement. So that could be for travel, it could be for your accommodations, that could be in the form of, and that could be in the form of reimbursements or a stipend. There are lots of other models. The one thing that I really encourage people to think critically about is how much you value your time and your expertise. And if a conference is not, at least at the very absolute least, providing you a ticket to the full event, you might want to reconsider whether that's a conference that you were really, really committed to. Because organizers don't have an event if they don't have speakers. You are the content in this case. So that plays a role in the conferences that I personally even decide to apply to, let alone accept. And this can take a ton of different forms. Some people will use Google Forms to bring in that information, but two very popular options, which are a little more standardized, that you can sign up for and reuse your proposals, are papercall.io and sessionize.com. And we can talk about those if we have questions about that later. So things that you will absolutely need, you're always going to want a bio, a photo, and an abstract. And the requirements for that abstract are going to change depending on the conference or meetup that you are applying to. Sometimes people will ask for links to videos or other presentations. They might ask for slides that you have posted online somewhere. More likely, they are going to ask for an outline of your talk. So your abstract might be the snippet that is meant to draw people in, that's going to be in the program and that sort of thing. Or you might have, in addition, an outline of the talk, which is going to be more of a detailed breakdown. And usually you're going to see some version of why should you be giving this talk? And that doesn't need to be a list of qualifications. You don't need to talk about, well, I've been using X technology for 20 years. That's really cool if you have been, but this is where I personally start to get into my story and why this topic is important to me, why I feel like I have something to say about it. Not necessarily what quantifiable qualification makes me the right person to speak. It's more about why I'm doing it in the first place. So when we talk about writing your bio, and again, this is one of our things that you will always have to have this. you want to tell your story as you're writing your bio. Ideally, and this, you can tweak this depending on the event again. Personally, I have a file that is just different bios. It's like the same, it's essentially the same information, but like tweaked for different scenarios. So like there's a super short one. There is one that goes into detail about like the topics that I have taught in workshops and boot camps and that sort of thing. There is one that really hones in on my experiences in Detroit specifically. And so just as time goes on, I have built up this list. And so now when I go to apply to an event, I go to that file and I say, okay, this bio is the most relevant, and I'll bring that in. When you're doing this, when you're writing these, you want to make sure that you are, one, grabbing your attendees' attention. You're telling us, again, you're reiterating why you are giving this talk. That can include your qualifications. If you are giving a talk on accessibility in Angular and you worked on the tools that make Angular more accessible, by all means, tell us about that. But if, like me, your approach to accessibility, your introduction to the topic had to do with my blind and visually impaired friends asking me to build them a website, that's relevant. That doesn't make me qualified technically to talk about accessibility, but it explains why I'm there. You want to inject your personality. As you can tell by the way that I'm speaking that I have a certain storytelling style. I do a lot of this with my hands. I do a lot of dancing when I'm standing and not in a stairwell. You want to, as much as you can, make your bio show who you are, as much as you can in a few sentences. And then, like I said, you want to kind of adapt that based on your audience. If you're applying to like a very serious computer science-y, very academic event, then maybe you want to tone that down a little bit, and that's totally fine. But I definitely encourage people to really make that voice as strong as you possibly can. So this is something that I actually pulled from the Global Diversity CFP Day, and absolutely, if there is one in your city, I highly recommend going to one of these events. Then the next round is coming up in March, I believe. And I ran the first event here in Detroit, and we'll be doing so again this coming year. It's a fantastic resource, and it's aimed at really building people up and encouraging people to get involved and to start speaking, even if they're a little uncomfortable. And so the way that this works is, this is kind of a jumping off point. Currently, Aisha Blake is a JavaScript developer at Detroit Labs. Before that, she was a freelance web development instructor who moonlighted as a WordPress developer. Also, she is super into karaoke and puppies. That's basically my bio. I started with that little snippet, those facts about me, and then I injected that personality, that story, into the bio. And so now it reads a little bit more like something you would want to read in a program. But this is a good prompt to kind of get you going. And again, the Global Diversity CFP Day is going to have a ton more information, and there could be a ton of really experienced, really accomplished speakers who volunteer as mentors. So if you have the opportunity, I'd absolutely take advantage of that. The way that we kind of get deeper as we're doing these bios is asking these interview questions. And again, these come from that same presentation, that same event. So the questions are, what lights you up? What's the coolest thing you've accomplished? What are you a product of? What are some of your talk ideas? Why you? So getting back to like, why is this important to you? And you can see that I am low on battery, so I'm gonna close that. We're gonna keep going. I'm living on the wild side here. So what are you a product of? What are some of your talk ideas? Why you? So getting back at that story of like, why are you here? Why is this important to you? And then what's important about you that isn't on your resume? So what is unique and interesting about you? And even if you don't think it is, even if you're like, oh, that thing, that's just something I do, that's okay. The point of this structure, this interview structure, is that you're going to just talk. You're just going to talk to somebody else. And that somebody else is going to draft your bio. And that way, you don't have that filter of, oh, what I do or what I am is not important. That I found is really, really useful. So the next few things here are just things to keep in mind as you're building your talk. You want to think about how you care for your audience. So using inclusive language, being really mindful, really intentional about your content warnings. So if something that you talk about is going to touch on anything that might be a trigger for someone or that might cause significant discomfort, say something. If you have flashing lights or anything that moves really quickly in your presentation, which, and loud noises as well, which I would, again, caution against. But if it's really integral to your presentation, that's something that you would include in those content warnings as well. But like I said, I would avoid those things if at all possible. So when we talk about telling your story, and which I've talked about a few times, you really want to get at what you're trying to accomplish with the talk. And when I say that, I mean, are you trying to inform? Are you trying to convince people? Is there some sort of call to action after this? And there should be, even if that call to action is just go and check out this really cool thing. That call to action should be super clear. If not at the beginning, definitely by the end of that talk. You want to think about how you could use storytelling to meet that goal. So whatever it is, whether let's say you're trying to convince people of something, how could you use storytelling to meet that goal? How can you pull from your life or your experience to convince people that this is the right thing, this is what they should go do? And then you want that whole presentation to be a cohesive story with arcs that relate to those lessons that you're trying to impart. There is a really great talk, really all of Saran's talks from Saran from Code Newbie. All of her talks are fantastic, but one really comes to mind when I'm talking about telling your story. Recently, I saw her present, and she was talking largely sort of at a high level about how we, as women specifically, can help each other in a very male-dominated space, how we can be advocates for each other. And in that presentation, she was telling a story about how she was invited to this event. But within that story of, I got invited to this event and I didn't really know why, there were specific moments within that she called out and used really effectively to illustrate her point. All right, so at this point, you've got your bio, you've got your abstract, and those are the big things. Those are the things that are going to take a lot of time. And at that point, it's time. It's time to submit. The thing that I think holds a lot of people up is that they think, oh, well, I submitted to self-conference. We'll see if they accept me. And then they stop. I attended a lot of conferences in 2018, and I did that because I applied to everything that interested me. And then I wound up having to say no to some of them. There were so many. That's not to say that you should just farm out your proposals indiscriminately, but it makes sense to apply to all of the conferences that you really want to attend or to speak at and see what happens. Chances are you're going to have more acceptances than you think, and possibly even than you can handle. But it doesn't hurt to apply to multiple conferences. It also doesn't hurt, within reason, to send multiple proposals into the same conference. And in fact, a lot of them will encourage that. Some will set a limit. For us, it's 3, or it has been 3 historically. But that's also an option. And the last part, which is not necessarily going to help with your application process, but I think it does help with getting comfortable with the community around an event that you're accepted to, or even if you're not, staying engaged with that community, reaching out to people via Slack is a really great way to, one, get more comfortable, and to kind of feel out what is important to that community, which can help you when you're actually delivering the talk. But it's also just a great way to connect with people. Kevin did that exact thing, and that's how I wound up on SwiftKick. So yeah, I definitely recommend it. So that's all I got. Please feel free to ask questions and chat with us now. But if anybody wants to reach out, feel free to hit me up on Twitter.
I was having a mild panic attack when I saw 7%, 2% on your oh my gosh.
Yep.
So let's get right to the questions then. I just got one from Solomon. He said, "What is your experience on how the speaker speaks? For example, whenever I hear Gandalf's voice, it is calm voice and talking fairly slow."
Yeah. So I'm actually going to walk and get my charger, and we'll figure this out. But my, oh dear.
So while you're walking, I can talk to it for a moment. One of the things, how you present yourself is very important. And if you are not, if you're soft voiced, you that's one of the small things you should work on. The stairwell is better broadband than my home. I know what you mean, Ryan. I think her battery died as she was going in the door, so we'll give her a couple minutes and see if she comes back. One thing I've also seen is folks who might not speak English as their first language, maybe it's a second or third language, might pronounce certain words differently than a native English speaker might speak. The one thing that I've learned just in my experience is you really have to slow yourself down, that your brain is moving a million miles per minute, and your voice should not try to compensate with as fast as you're thinking something. Because when you're up on stage and you're in front of a projector, you're talking or you're thinking 2 minutes ahead. So, all right, I have to hit this point. I need to hit that point, and so on and so on. But if your voice is trying to keep up with your thought process, it's going to be discombobulated for the audience. So really take a deep breath and slow yourself down, because even though in your mind you're speaking very slowly, you're not coming off that way to your audience. A good mental trick that I use is to carry a bottle of water with me all the time. If you need that mental break, to take a sip of water, because no one's going to complain if you're not speaking while your mouth is full of water. All right. So she fell out of the room. We'll give her a moment to see if she comes back in. She's joined the room. Let's see if she reconnects. Hey, at least she got through her entire presentation before.
So sorry about that.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Yeah, right. I just jumped into an empty room that I found. Hopefully no one comes to kick me out in the next 20 minutes.
No, I think we're good. I've just kind of been answering the question from my standpoint since you fell off. Is there anything you'd like to add or talk about just a voice of when you're speaking in front of others?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sorry, I have no idea what you just said. But
I think my biggest tip was you will naturally want to speak faster than you should. So try to slow yourself down, even though it is slower than you think you should be speaking.
Yes.
And take breaks, take a drink of water, stop yourself if you need that mental break.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely talking as slowly as you can without distorting what you're trying to say. Because I've definitely seen people go the other way, and it's like huge pauses between between sentences and that sort of thing, which is not ideal either. But definitely enunciating as much as you can as well. I know I've talked to a lot of people who also have some insecurity around speaking with an accent, and that, first of all, speaking as someone from like an American audience, most people are going to be like, no, that's really cool. They might not feel that way, but
yep.
that's the reality. Most Americans are going to think that you sound super cool, and they're going to be envious rather than annoyed. But that is, in that case, it is absolutely even more important to enunciate as much as you can, and again, to speak slowly. And if you're noticing that something is off, maybe you got something in your throat, or you could use a drink of water, just stop, take a drink of water. That's cool.
I kind of touched on while you were dropped off that if English is not your first language, it's I know a lot of folks who English is their second or third language. They don't pronounce certain words the same way that a native English speaker might say them. Like I have this memory drilled in my head when I was in college. I had a professor who was English was his second language, and he would always pronounce integer as integer. And it was one of those things where every time he said integer, I couldn't concentrate on anything else. It was just like, wait, what? That's not how you say that. that is not how I perceive that word to be pronounced. I think it's more difficult if English is not your first language, just because English is such a complex language, and it's very difficult to know how to say everything.
Yeah. Even as a native English speaker, there are I learn all the time.
Well, we had another question from Ryan, and he asks, "How do you get over the horror of seeing and hearing yourself?"
Yeah, this is actually a thing that I had to work through, especially when I was younger. I had just this absolute horror of the sound of my own voice. It was terrible, and I still. It's going to be jarring unless you do it all the time. And honestly, I know some people who do, and it's still weird. It's just, it sounds different than what you hear in your own head. And so there's always going to be some element of that, just like there's probably always going to be some apprehension when you are going up to speak in front of a group. Like there's an element of that that's going to be there for a while. But I personally have benefited from exposure therapy. I will have my talks recorded as often as I can, and I've also started recording online courses. So I think we were talking earlier. I've done a couple for Treehouse, and I've recorded a few other things. And the process of editing those videos, you get over yourself real quick. It's just kind of, it's one of those things that for me, it was really helpful to just kind of dive in and work through it. So if you have the opportunity to have your talk recorded or to record it yourself, even, that can be really valuable. I've seen speakers come to events and bring their own recording equipment. Just like, even if the conference is not recording, feel free to, like, I mean, I think it's best to always ask about that sort of thing first, but I have trouble imagining most conferences having a problem with you recording yourself, especially if it's just for you. It's also a really, really great way to start looking at and really getting some honest critique about your delivery.
I have learned through recording what all my verbal tics are. And I think that's the number one thing you get out of recording and listening to yourself recorded is you learn what your tics are. Mine, I've evolved through my tics. I used to be like this, like that. When it's like to so and so and but yeah, I've gone through them all. The most difficult thing is to slow myself down and say, I don't need those words. Those words are filler. And the audience, if someone's very receptive to that sort of tic, they grasp on that. And it's like their version, like it's their version of integer. It's like they'll hear it and they'll just hear it and hear it and hear it. And they're not receiving the message I'm trying to get through. And I'm doing it to myself right now. It's horrible.
This is a new one.
But it's hard. It takes a lot of practice, and it will take years and years and years.
Absolutely. I've done the same thing. I've moved through different filler words for sure. And now I find that what I'll do is I'll say the first word. There's still some likes in there, but that's also how I speak. And so I, to a certain extent, will intentionally leave some of those in
Hmm.
because I feel like that's more authentic. That's more my personal voice.
Yep.
There, there's absolutely a point where it just becomes ridiculous. But what I do now is I will start a sentence and I'll pause
Yeah.
and I'll think about what I'm going to say next after I've already started that sentence. And on the one hand, there are fewer filler words, but there's also uh, occasional ums, especially when I'm doing anything that has to do with speaking, which is often. I'll be really, really conscious of my own takes. And I'm like, oh, I just did it again. I did it again. But it's a thing that you kind of develop over time, and there'll probably always be some version of that, but it'll be less and less noticeable to other people.
Yeah.
Whereas a newer speaker might come up on stage and every sentence, and I've counted. I've been in presentations where I've started counting
Hmm.
because it's just so many. But yeah, basically that's another one.
There's two types of ums as well. You can count the quantity of but then there's also the duration of an I've been in talks where the speaker up there and they say and blah 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 blah. It's like, you
For
know
sure.
that they have no idea what they want to say next. They're gathering all their thoughts so then they can speak really quickly and just get everything out and go on
Yeah.
to the next thing. uh the great, yeah, basically I think I also had actually a couple times in a previous
Mm.
a previous speaking life. Another thing that's really good about recording is you can reuse that content. If you're speaking, one of the things you're probably trying to do is build a personal brand. And by recording yourself, that's just content you can use. You can put it up on YouTube or some other location and tell people, hey, here's a talk I did at this place. If you're interested and you weren't able to be there, here's the talk for you to go listen to. If you're submitting to other conferences for Revolution Conf, we have to go through 500 some submissions. If someone gives me a submission that has a YouTube link attached to it of them doing that talk somewhere else, I will probably watch 15, 20 minutes of that talk just to get a sense of, is this the type of talk I like to bring to our conference? So reuse your content over and over again. And like you said, most conference organizers are perfectly fine with you recording unless they're paying you specifically to be a speaker. That's the only case
Right.
I've seen issues. But if you're not paying me to be the speaker, and I'm not talking about covering T&E or anything like that, but if I'm not being paid to be there, I'm there as a volunteer. I'm kind of within my rights to record what I'm saying. But again, like you said, ask, see if they have a problem with it. But then say, hey, why aren't you recording the sessions? And they'll say, because it costs a ton of money.
Yes.
That's exactly what they're going to say.
That is actually one of my goals for self-conference is to be able to record our sessions, and it's just so much money. It'll one day.
One day. You need that one sponsor who is willing to fork up the several $1,000s per day that it costs. And self-conf is 2 days, right?
2 days.
2 days. How many tracks?
We were at 3 this past year. It's usually not too many.
That was the problem that we had, was if we were one track, it wasn't that bad. But we're basically four concurrent tracks across 2 days. So that requires 4 people to run the camera, to do the AV stuff. And that's expensive because then you're not in equipment, you're into manpower to do all the work. that just gets so dang expensive. We might have it at Revolution Conf this year because we have been working a deal with our AV company. We might, fingers crossed. So if someone would like to sponsor, talk to Kevin. All right. Any other questions? I will note, so I want to add one thing. You were talking about submitting to multiple conferences at the same time. One thing to kind of keep in mind, and this is as a conference organizer saying this, it is possible that you could submit to 2 conferences that will technically overlap with each other. So like you said, you might have to say no to something because you get accepted to something else. As a sign of respect to the other conference organizers, you should take your sessions out of the running as soon as you know you're not going to be able to fulfill that commitment, which means you should track what you submit your talks to.
Yes, absolutely. And that actually is a huge tip that I did not say anything about. I have a Trello board, this massive Trello board that keeps track of all of my submissions. There is, let me see if I have it open. I do have it open. I just always have it open. So my columns are off the list, on the list, applied, accepted, travel booked, complete, and then next year. And that next year is basically, they rejected me. I'll try again. It's also, I missed the CFP. I'll get it in there next time. And that has been so helpful. I will keep track of each card is a different conference, and I will keep track of what I submitted if it's not in Sessionize or Paper Call. That's what the other one's called.
Yeah.
Really, really helpful to see at a glance. Oh, I applied to these 3 conferences with that talk. I applied to these 2 with another. That's great. But the Trello allows me to keep all of that in one place, and it's been so helpful. I've actually applied to more conferences because I have that visual. I can see all of the ones that I am even like a little bit interested in, and I can see the progression, which is really nice.
And so I will say again, as a conference organizer, the most frustrating thing I've dealt with speakers, and it's always at acceptance time where we've gone through and we spent a copious amount of time going through these sessions and getting it down to what we consider our final list, to just be told by 3 or 4 speakers, oh yeah, I got accepted by this other thing, I'm going there instead. Okay. We would have appreciated it if you would have told us that, because then we would not have even considered. And a lot of people do. So it's not across the board. No one tells us. But if you're tracking it as well as you are, I don't track it that well. But I know I'm probably also not submitting to nearly as many things as you are. But be kind to your conference organizers. That's actually the number one thing why I will, if you are a speaker and you bail after acceptance, that's the number one reasons why I will never bring you back to our conference. Unless the bail reason is like there are good bail reasons and there are not good bail reasons.
Yeah, for sure.
We've had, that's a whole nother hour talk on bad bail reasons, but we've had people who have come back after the fact and went, oh yeah, I got accepted for this other thing a long time ago and I never bothered to tell you. All right, it's going to make me very difficult for me to select you in the future if you ever apply. So just food for thought. If you're submitting to a bunch of stuff and things might possibly conflict, just as soon as you know, just let people know. And it just takes an email. Heck, you could tell me on Twitter. It's like, Kevin, I'm going to this thing. Can you take my session out? And I think Sessionize and stuff lets you remove talks as well. So there's nothing stopping you from doing it other than just please do your own due diligence and check where you're speaking.
The moment that you know.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're right at the top of the hour, so this is probably as good a place as any to wrap up. Thank you so much, Aisha, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure chatting with you and learning from you. And we will put all of our notes in our show notes when this goes live on YouTube in a day or two. If you're watching this on YouTube, thanks for watching. And everyone will see you. Hopefully, we won't see you again this year because the next Swift Kick show would be on Christmas or the day after Christmas. And we're not going to do that. We're going to enjoy our holidays.
There you go.
So
Take some
everyone,
time.
yeah, take time for yourself with your friends and family. And we'll see you all again next year. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I missed the button. There we go.